Welcome back. So I was talking about Laura Esquivel. Laura Esquivel is a Mexican novelist, and Laura has focused on the crisscrossing lines. I was talking of crisscrossing, how a particular line intersects in many points other lines or more than one line. That is a crisscrossing of lines. And what is crisscrossing here? The personal narration which superimposes domestic problems upon the history of nation. Now, a history of nation always has a tendency to depend upon the meta narratives of history. So the meta narratives are, or the meta narrative is the thing which actually defines or explains or analyzes the things of a particular historical event of a nation. Say for partition, if we remove or digress a bit from this particular context of the partition of history, the history of partition of India and Pakistan, we will see that there is a meta narrative, the historical official version, and that particular version has certain perspectives. The Indian perspective sees the partition from the perspective of India, and that is the official perspective of India to see partition, and the Pakistan has just the opposite. Now, if I am trying to see the very event of partition from a personal historical perspective, then what I may be, being an Indian, I may have certain considerations for the Pakistani people or a particular Pakistani character, or I may be more critical about certain historical characters who were there directly participated, who actually directly participated in the partition, in the event partition. So personal history or personal historical perspective is something which is always ciphered, or which is always sidelined by the meta narratives of history to give an official and authentic version of history, which was rather challenged by many postmodernists and post-structuralist historicists. And here in the literary trend of Latin American literature, we find that with Laura Esquivel, what she is doing, that she is superimposing the personal historical details or the domestic details upon the very historical event of a particular nation. Now her work is like Water for Chocolate, that was published in 1989. Once again, it does what? It narrates the experiences of a woman in a single family. It is doing what? It is narrating the experience of a woman in a single family. So what Squivel is doing, he is seeing a particular event from a perspective of a single woman who of a single family, who is seeing history, who is seeing the historical development of time through 3 generations, and the perspective is a personal perspective. And these perspectives get built into the Mexican Revolution. So the Mexican Revolution, which has always a tendency of getting analyzed or getting interpreted through the meta narrative of the official version of history, the mega narrative of the official version of history, Laura Esquivel is subverting that trend, and she's doing what? She's trying to see that particular revolution, the Mexican Revolution, from the perspective of a woman, of a family, through 3 generations. The fictional history of Luisa Venezuela from Argentina is another history, also draws high praise. Now there is many other works. So in Luisa Valenzuela, I beg your pardon for my mispronunciation, Luisa Valenzuela. So these names are very hard to pronounce, and when I'm taking some online classes, it becomes really problematic for me sometimes to look at the book and to explain at the same time, and becoming at the same time being very much conscious about the camera and what is going on and all these things. So be with me. I'm trying. Okay. So along with Esquivel's like Water for Chocolate, where she is trying to look at the Mexican Revolution through the perspective of a single woman, the same thing if we see in the fictional history of Luisa Valenzuela, and she's from Argentina, and Cortázar also praises her works and describes her verse that the Cortázar describes the voice of Luisa as one of true freedom. And there Luisa is doing what in Lizard's Tale, in a work, The Lizard's Tale, she is doing what? She satirizes an eccentric wizard. No, she is describing a character who is a real character, who is a very powerful character, and who happens to be the widow of President Juan Perón, okay, of Mexico, and her name is Isabel Perón. So she is a particular character as a wizard, and through her perspective she is telling the history. So in Laura Esquivel we see that how the Mexican Revolution has been seen through the perspective of a single woman, and in the works of Luisa Valenzuela, an Argentinian writer, we see that in her work The Lizard's Tale, she is satirizing an eccentric wizard, and who has been described or who has been projected as a wizard who bears an uncanny resemblance. She is never telling that this particular wizard is this character, but there is a sort of uncanny resemblance between the wizard and a powerful person, Isabel Perón, the most powerful ministers of Isabel Perón, widow of President Juan Perón, and you must be knowing, of Argentina. Now this is something that we find, that how actually magic realism and Latin American literature go hand in hand, and both of them are actually complementing each other. Later magic realism was taken up and it became a pan-American issue, and many other postmodernist writers actually took up magic realism as a very important literary tool. Among the poets, there is Peru's Cesar Vallejo, who has a very close association with our topic or our subject, that is Pablo Neruda. Now Cesar Vallejo was not, she was sort of unsung poet, and he was not that much popular in his lifetime, and still now if we compare Pablo Neruda and Cesar Vallejo, most of us, we don't know the name of Vallejo, but we all know and the name of Pablo Neruda because of his popularity. And Neruda is sometimes said that he was more quoted, more familiar a name than even Shakespeare, it is said. Now today Vallejo, a study of Neruda becomes incomplete without the study of the works of Cesar Vallejo, and that has been said by Neruda himself, and he has observed rightly that he says that 60s that applauded his work in the late 60s have also started. Neruda said that those who most vociferously applauded his work means applauded Neruda's work, applauded his work in the late 60s, have also started to Vallejoate, means they are also considering and they are also giving due respect, due acknowledgement to the works of Vallejo. So that is that he says that Vallejoate means they are also giving due recognition and acknowledgement to the works of Vallejo. Now Vallejo's poetry was mostly the poetry of protest, and he saw the sorrows and sufferings of the people as irrevocable, and Vallejo believed that the people, the common people, are always in a permanent imprisonment, and he was the voice who protested against this permanent imprisonment of people. But Vallejo was mentally tortured by the then contemporary politics of his time, and he was a very introvert type of poet. But later Neruda was the person who revoked Vallejo's work, and he made his readers read Vallejo, because he said that without reading Vallejo, the reading of Neruda will remain incomplete. But Vallejo's work was, if we study Vallejo, we will see that most of his works are actually the protest against the permanent imprisonment of people, that the common people are always imprisoned in many ways, socially, politically, culturally, and in so many ways, and he was the person who protested against that. Okay, now Pablo Neruda, if we come back to Pablo Neruda, he himself says that my works or reading of my works will remain incomplete without reading Vallejo. He is almost equal to Vallejo, but yet Pablo Neruda is vastly read, he is vastly quoted, he is vastly cited, and he is a very popular writer. Neruda can be seen as a representative poet of the entire world in the 20th century, and one of a few who's literally sung. He's the most famous poet. If I say that, many people will answer that a poet of 20th century, Pablo Neruda; a poet of Latin America, Pablo Neruda; a poet dealing with the common people, the issues of the common people as well as dealing with love, Pablo Neruda. So Neruda is a person, is a widely known, widely sung, a very popular writer. Okay, now it is said the students in the 70s read and quoted him as though he belonged to all the love affairs and political disturbances of the age, whatever may be the country. So these particular line I am quoting because this particular line gives the very two basic things that Pablo Neruda addressed in his works, that is love, and another thing is the political disturbance. Besides a poet, he was a politician who was a very important figure in the communist Chile, and he had certain contributions in the politics of Chile. That's why Neruda was equally interested about the political disturbance and about the issues of the common people, as well as he dealt with love. So these two apparently opposing ideas, these two apparently opposing things were actually brought into one by Pablo Neruda in his works. And when we will be reading the poems, the 6 poems that are there in our syllabus, we will see that how Neruda is doing that, how he is bringing both the two issues in his works. So he's a love poet, he's a poet dealing with love. If I read this line, I want to do with you what spring does with the cherry trees. I cannot help reading a few lines from my favorite poem of Neruda, that is, tonight I can write the saddest lines. So he says, tonight, just allow me to read. Tonight I can write the saddest lines. Write, for example, the night is shattered and the blue stars shiver in distance. The night wind revolves in the sky and sings. Tonight I can write the saddest lines. I loved her, and sometimes she loved me too. Through nights like this one, I held her in my arms. I kissed her again and again under the endless sky. She loved me. Sometimes I loved her too. How could one not have loved her great still eyes? Tonight I can write the saddest lines. To think that I do not have her, to feel that I have lost her. To hear the immense night still more immense without her, and the verse falls to the soul like dew to the pasture. What does it matter that my love could not keep her? The night is shattered and she is not with me. This is all. In the distance, someone is singing. In the distance, my soul is not satisfied that it has lost her. My sight searches for her as though to go to her. My heart looks for her and she is not with me. The same night, whitening the same trees, we of that time are no longer the same. I no longer love her, that's certain, but how I loved her. My voice tried to find the wind to touch her hearing. Another's, she will be another's, like my kisses before. Her voice, her bright body, her infinite eyes. I no longer love her, that's certain, and maybe I love her. Love is so short, forgetting so long. Because through nights like this, one, I held her in my arms. My soul is not satisfied that it has lost her, though this be the last pain that she makes me suffer, and this the last verses that I write for her. So these are very simple lines, but focus on just, if you go through the lines, you will find that how deeply emotional Neruda is, and he is he's describing her lost love, his lost love, that the love with a particular girl that is over, the relationship has been broken, but the very pain, he says that love is so short, love is so temporal, but the forgetting one is very long. It takes time to forget, because love also continues with it, takes with it the very nostalgia of the exuberance, the essence of love, the effects of love, which actually gives the poet the power, the energy to write this poem. And he says that because you left me, because my love has been broken, that the relation has been breached, that gave me the power to write this poem. So how emotional exuberance you can find, that it is emotionally so touching a poem this is. And the same poet is writing a very politically conscious poem when we see this poem, The Way Spain Was. And here I'll read a few lines. The poem starts, taut and dry Spain was, a day's drum of dull sound, a plain, an eagle's eyrie, a silence below the lashing weather. So he's describing Spain and Spain's settlement in Chile. And the last stanza, stone of the sun, pure among territories, Spain ven with bloods and metals, blue and victorious, proletariat of petals and bullets, alone alive, somnolent, resounding. So here we see that he is dealing with the relationship between Spain and its colony Chile. Or in the Discoverers of Chile, we see that he is ending the poem. The Spaniards, seated by the rose one day, by the olive oil, by the wine, by the antique sky, did not imagine this point of choleric stone being born from under the dung of the sea eagle. So he's talking of the answering back of the colonizers, that how Chile will try, or Chile has the power or the potential to answer back to the colonizing tendency of their colonizer masters, the Spanish people. So all these you will find in Neruda's poetry. So this is the thing. So you will find both love and the essential political ideas in the works of Neruda. The poet truly says that I want to do with you what spring does with the cherry trees. So what happens in spring? If you see in your campus, there are 2 or 3 cherry trees in your campus, that it has become almost red. So you can find various layers of meaning from a poet, from a communist poet, who says that I want to do with you what spring does with the cherry trees, that the cherry trees become red with flowers when it is in full bloom. So it is equally applicable to a relationship between a lover and the beloved, as well as to a person who is out and out a revolutionist and who wants to change the country, who wants to bring in a new dawn. Okay, the poet truly becomes the common people's hero, both with his association with love and politics for the sake of the common mass. So that was what Neruda was. Although actually Neruda died of cancer, he had an early death, and very soon after there was a coup. Coup means change, that is a sort of revolution. After Chile's Marxist president Salvador Allende's fall, Neruda was remembered. He died of cancer after that, for his lifelong commitment to a communist party. So Neruda was a communist love poet. So this is something which actually describes or terms Neruda and his works. and as a very public figure in his country. So critics have called Neruda a self-indulgent writer. So some people say that Neruda was very self-indulgent. In his poems we find that most of the time he is very subjective and he is trying to express his own feelings that deal with love and his nostalgia and so many things. But Neruda is also the poet who has deep feelings for the surroundings, for the society, and for the common people, for the cause of the oppressed, like Vallejo. So Vallejo was a person who only protested against the permanent imprisonment of the common people, who always wanted to voice for the common people. But in Neruda we find that this thing was much more, that this particular protest or this particular concern for the common people got more enriched, got more complicated, got more something enriched with his dealings with love as well as the concern for the common people. He is not only expressing his own subjective feelings, but at the same time he is able to channelize his subjective feelings in the wider context of the common people and their cause. Now they say that there is one poetic failure in the career of in Neruda, that is his one of his poems addressed to Stalin, that is the episode. But most of these poems, they are starting from his love poems, which has that grace and that emotional exuberance. All his poems are actually not only his subjective expression of his emotional exuberance, but they are all intellectually played with, they are intellectually laced with the things and at the same time all his poems actually move from his subjective feelings to the greater cause of the mass. Now, in his works, Neruda said that he sometimes speaks of his unwritten works, that he said that they hadn't found the land. This is one of the lines from Neruda's poem. They hadn't found the land where I set about being born. So he said that I have many unwritten works, I have so many things in my mind, but I don't find that the time is ripe yet to write them, because the world is not ready to accept that. So this again brings Neruda back to the very idea of Marquez's mythical land and connects it with magic realism, that there is a possibility, or there was rather many possibilities of writing many things, but the time is not ripe yet. So it leaves the readers in an open, forking, dividing path of many possibilities. What were those works which Neruda wanted to say but he did not do because the time is not ripe yet? So this is the thing. So Neruda's contemporary writers were Sara de Ibanez from Uruguay, Ernest Cardenal from Nicaragua, but the most famous writer who was contemporary of Neruda was Octavio Paz. And all know the name of Octavio Paz, and the latest collection of writing were Freedom Under the Word collected poems. So this is the writing of Octavio Paz, and Octavio Paz was the writer. He was actually from Mexico, and he was sent to India and was posted in Bombay as a Mexican ambassador. And when he was in Bombay, he had a first-hand experience of the poor people in Bombay and their miserable condition, and he wrote very affectionately about the condition of the people in Bombay. His poems, Paz's poems, after his return to his own country, take on the tone of bewilderment of what, and there is some bitterness there which is hard to reconcile. So we see that in Paz, we see that most of the Latin American writers, they are a bit they have the tendency of going against the grand narratives. They have the tendency to subvert the accepted order because they have a colonial legacy. At the same time, they wanted open-endedness. Number two, they wanted many possibilities so that the readers can appreciate, enter into their text, analyze their works from many possible perspectives. And at the same time, they have the tendency of mixing or superimposing the personal with the political, the personal with the national, and at the same time they have the tendency of speaking for the common mass, for the common cause. In Neruda, coming back to the point of Neruda, we see that Neruda is the person who, or the poet, who actually mingles his subjective emotions and emotional exuberances and his love affairs, his feelings of love with that of his concern for the common mass. And then we find the writers like Paz, who actually also dealt with the common people. So this is what we can say about the Latin American literature. The Latin American writers were mostly radical writers, writing their writings were dedicated to a particular cause. Most of the time that particular cause is for the cause of the common people, and for them it is not only enough to create, to versify. Many of them created or wrote or engaged themselves in creative works for a particular cause. Sometimes some critics have said that their writings are propaganda writings, but this is not true, because in one of Neruda's poems, we will do that in Ars Poetica, we will see that Neruda very blatantly, very openly says that poetry is not something which is born out of the beautiful things of the world, but poetry comes from the very lowly things, from the very pain, from the very blood stains, and from many oppressions and miseries and permanent imprisonments. So it relates it with the writings of Baudelaire and Baudelaire's Les Fleurs du Mal, that means the flower of evil, the flower that blooms out of what? That is the mud, that is the flower that blooms out of the very what to say, that the evil things of this art, the flower blooms out of that. That poetry not only comes from the beautiful feelings and emotion and the beautiful rosy things of life, but poetry comes from the very pain, passion, oppression, death, bloodstains, fightings, and many more things which we generally do not want to associate with poetry. So this is the thing that we can say about Latin American literature. I hope all of you are able to understand what I wanted to say. Now, if you have any question, you can call me personally, and have a nice time. I will let you know. In the next class, we will start with Neruda's poem, and that is tonight. That is what I recited to them. Tonight I can write the saddest lines, that particular poem. And till then, stay safe, stay at home, follow the rules of lockdown, don't go out, watch TV, and don't get upset. Take care. Have a nice time. Good night.